Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are on to Journal Collection number 23 by the great Ralph Waldo Emerson. We are making our way through the entirety of his journals. And his journals contain obviously his diary entries, but also sometimes correspondence, and sometimes a correspondence from someone back to him will be preserved in this. So it's a very rich source, not only of his private thinking, but on occasion of other things that are going on, that we get a little bit of a bigger picture of Emerson the man and the writer. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and start with our first entry here, which is Boston, January 4th, 1832. And as I said in the previous video, Emerson is aged 28 at the time. And with that said, I will go ahead and start. More is understood than is expressed in the most diffuse discourse. It is the unsaid part of every lecture that does the most good. If my poor Tuesday evening lectures were to any auditor the total of his exposition of Christianity, what a beggarly faith were it! Death, said you, we die daily. Death, the soul never dies. Theory of agreeable and disagreeable people, alluded to by George Bradford, that reflecting and self-improving minds are not agreeable company, but that indolent and deceitful rather. January 6th. Shall I not write a book on topics such as follow? Chapter 1, that the mind is its own place. Chapter 2, that exact justice is done. Chapter 3, that good motives are at the bottom of many bad actions, such as business before friends. Chapter 4, that the soul is immortal. Chapter 5, on prayers. Chapter 6, that the best is the true. Chapter 7, that the mind discerns all things. Chapter 8, that the mind seeks itself in all things. Chapter 9, that truth is its own warrant. What follows from this outlining of chapters for a proposed book are a list of names, and a footnote says that these names are very likely a list of the serious-minded and scholarly young men who might meet for conversation or form a literary club. And with that said, I'll read out who these people are. In some cases, there are question marks by these names, usually by the first name, because it's not for sure who that person might be. So Charles Sprague, Charles Sprague, Reverend Mellish I. Mott or Moat, Edward Wigglesworth, Charles H., later Admiral Davis, George P. Bradford, Willis, Reverend George Ripley, Henry, Cornelius Conway Felton, and Reverend Frederick H. Hedge. January 7th. There is a process in the mind very analogous to crystallization in the mineral kingdom. I think of a particular fact of singular beauty and interest. In thinking of it, I am led to many more thoughts which show themselves, first partially and afterwards more fully. But in the multitude of them I see no order. When I would present them to others, they have no beginning. There is no method. Leave them now and return to them again. Domesticate them in your mind, do not force them into arrangement too hastily, and presently you shall find they will take their own order, and the order they assume is divine. It is God's architecture. January 9th. I cannot help quoting from Mendelssohn's Phaedo the following rule, quote, all that which, being admitted is true, would procure the human race a real advantage or a feeble consolation, acquires by that alone a high degree of probability. When skeptics, says Socrates, object against the belief in God and virtue that it is a simple political invention imagined for the good of society, I reply, oh, imagine a doctrine as indispensable to man, and I will pledge myself upon its truth. This is a true account of our instinctive faith. Why do I believe in a perfect system of compensations, that exact justice is done? Certainly not upon a narrow experience of a score or 100 instances, for I boldly affirm and believe the universality of the law, but simply that it is better in the view of the mind than any other way, therefore must be the true way. Whatever is better must be the truer way. Quote, little matters it to the simple lover of truth to whom he owes such or such a reasoning. Mendelssohn. Article Beauty in Rees Encyclopedia, written by Flaxman, also Sculpture. Memoranda read Treatise on Commerce of Lib. Useful Knowledge and Mr. Lee's Exposition of Evidence. Emerson writes briefly on dreams. Hideous dreams last night, and queried today whether they were any more than exaggerations of the sins of the day. Quote, regard not dreams, since they are but the images of our hopes and fears. Cato, Fielding's Proverbs. January 10th. It is the best part of the man, I sometimes think, that revolts most against his being a minister. His good revolts from the official goodness. If he never spoke or acted but with the full consent of his understanding, if the whole man acted always, how powerful would be every act and word. Well then, or ill then, how much power he sacrifices by conforming himself to say and do in other folks' time instead of in his own. The difficulty is that we do not make a world of our own, but fall into institutions already made and have to accommodate ourselves to them to be useful at all, and this accommodation is, I say, a loss of so much integrity and, of course, of so much power. But how shall the droning world get on if all of its beaux esprits recalcitrate upon its approved forms and accepted institutions, and quit them all in order to be single-minded? The double refiners would produce at the other end the double damned. January 11th. People sometimes wonder that persons wholly uneducated to write, yet eminent in some other ability, should be able to use language with so much purity and force. But it is not wonderful. The manner of using language is surely the most decisive test of intellectual power, and he who has intellectual force of any kind will be sure to show it there. For that is the first and simplest vehicle of mind, is of all things next to the mind, and the vigorous Saxon that uses it well is of the same block as the vigorous Saxon that formed it, and works after the same manner. January 12th. Diogenes was a true philosopher when he compared his shade and his sunshine to the alternate residence of the Persian king at Susa and Ecbatana. Men live, as it were, upon concentric circles, a king upon a little larger arc, a peasant upon a little less, but the most perfect proportion subsisting between the enjoyments and pains of one and of the other. Set your habits right, as Paley said. Trifles will be occasions of pleasure to a wise man and of instruction. But nature must be exhausted to furnish 1 hour's stimulus to John Dart. The good mind is set to happiness, the evil to pain. January 20th. Don't trust children with edge tools. Don't trust man, great God, with more power than he has until he has learned to use that little better. What a hell should we make of the world if we could do what we would? Put a button on the foil till the young fencers have learned not to put each other's eyes out. Is it not true that our best power does increase exactly in the measure that we learn how to use it? Quote, O reason, reason, art not thou he whom I seek? Fenelon, Apud Cousin. January 21st. Write on personal independence. There are men whose language is strong and defying enough, yet their eyes and their actions ask leave of other men to live. A man considers the fashion of his better neighbor's coat and hat, and then condemns his own. The only way to improve the fashion of his own coat and hat is to forget his neighbor and work out his own results. To eat less dinner, to rise earlier, to work harder, do more benefits, and more strictly adhere in his acts to the decisions of his own judgment. So to do will make his own coat and hat very respectable in the eyes of all men. Quote, Say not then, this with that lace do well, but this with my discretion will be brave. End quote, Herbert. What is the fault of Hotspur's avowal? It seems just. Quote, I'll give thrice so much land to any well-deserving friend, but in the way of bargain, mark ye me, I'll cavil on the 9th part of a hair. End quote. Henry IV, Part 1, 3. Be as beneficent as the sun or the sea, but if your rights as a rational being are trenched on, die on the first inch of your territory. It requires circumspection, else he will be surprised by his good nature into acquiescence in false sentiments uttered by others. Be a Cato, and it will be easier to keep out of sin and shame than in the ease and social habit of Maecenas. No man gains credit for his cowardly courtesies. Every one makes allowance for so much bowling and smiling and compliment as he supposes was insincere, and rates the character so much the worse for that heavy subtraction. The true man of business never brags. He talks simply of extensive commercial operations that embrace years and nations and their completion. A country attorney has much more to say about Washington and the free trade and tariff conventions than the person whose influence is felt in conventions. Emerson writes briefly on dreams and beasts. They are two keys by which we are to find out the secrets of our own nature. All mystics use them. They are like comparative anatomy. They are test objects, or we may say that must be a good theory of the universe. That theory will bring a commanding claim to confidence which explains these phenomena. Emerson comments on travel. Quote, Here is he who gave away his lands to see those of other men. End quote. My friend admires the knowledge and tact of his fellow boarders who have seen the world and know so much more of men than he. They got it, however, not by peering about all over the world, but by minding their business. In the steadfast attention to all the details of their profession, they met this information. Let the clergyman attend as steadfastly to his profession, and he will get as much fact as much commanding knowledge. Let him trust God's order, which supplies every eye, which keeps its place with its fair share of opportunity, as well as every mouth with its food. My friend expects with traveling to learn human nature, as if to become acquainted with man it were necessary to know all the individuals upon earth. Were it not wiser to let God judge for us in this matter? He has provided every man with 20 or 30 companions and 200 or 300 acquaintances, by way of specimen of the varieties of human character, and as a large book wherein he may read his own nature in extenso. Consider also that everybody's occasions provide him with much variety of intercourse. He is obliged to see the state house, the college, the almshouse and jail, court, camp, ship, stable, mine, and the mountain sometimes in his life, to travel many hundred miles by land and water. Keep your eyes open, and God will provide you opportunity. Besides, if you go out to see the moon, it will not please you, but it will brighten and cheer your walk of business. All goes to show that if you do your duty, wisdom will flow in. Emerson speaks on a subject. Write a sermon about a house hero, upon the hero to his valet de chambre, the ugly face that obstinate association of true words and good acts has made beautiful. Quote, Real virtue is most loved where it is most nearly seen, and no respect which it commands from strangers can equal the never-ceasing admiration it excites in the daily intercourse of domestic life. End quote. Plutarch, Pericles. The stinking philosophy of the utilitarian. Nihil magnificum nihil generosum sapit, as Cicero said of that of Epicurus. Repose of mind we must have. We must not feel Pyrrhonistically, however we may speculate. What can comfort us if we think right and wrong are idiosyncrasies? Quote, Duty subsists, immutably survive for our support the measures and the forms which an abstract intelligence supplies, whose kingdom is where time and space are not. End quote. January 27th. Talked with Reed and Worcester last evening about the mutual influence of spirits. Mendelssohn's principle that the desirable is the true is the best thing which can be alleged in favor of the position. God, we agreed, was the communication between us and other spirits, departed or present. Good wishes of us affect them. What is this more than the stoical precept that, quote, the wise man who lifts his finger in Rome affects all the wise men on the earth, end quote. Indeed, their position is just equivalent, for they suppose that spirit affects spirit, both unconscious. Worcester said, God not so much sees as dissolves us. Boston, January 26th, 1832. Heard Dr. Channing last evening at the Peace Society. Very good views. Freedom unfits for war, unchains industry, and so makes property. Then men are unwilling to put it at stake. Improves men and gives them individuality. Do not follow leaders, etc. Only two men ever controlled public opinion in this country, Washington and Jefferson. Efforts of the country in the last war paralyzed by the minority, etc. January 30th, 1832. Every man hath his use, no doubt, and every one makes ever the effort according to the energy of his character to suit his external condition to his inward constitution. If his external condition does not admit of such accommodation, he breaks the form of his life and enters a new one which does. If it will admit of such accommodation, he gradually bends it to his mind. Thus, Finney can preach, and so his prayers are short. Parkman can pray, and so his prayers are long. Lowell can visit, and so his church service is less. But what shall poor I do, who can neither visit, nor pray, nor preach to my mind? Can you not be virtuous? Can you not be temperate? Can you not be charitable? Can you not be chaste? Can you not be industrious? Can you not keep your word? And possibly when you have learned these things, you may find the others. There's an annotated insertion here by the editor. The following letter, though not in the journal, seemed to the editors worthwhile to insert here. It was written by Mr. Emerson to a young cousin of his wife, Miss Elizabeth Tucker, later Mrs. McGregor of Derry, New Hampshire. Boston, February 1st, 1832. My dear cousin, if it were not true that it is never too late to do right, I should be quite ashamed to send my list of books at such a long distance behind my promise. When I spent so pleasant a day at your house, I thought it would be very easy, and I knew it would be very pleasant for me to make out a scheme of study for your vacation as soon as I got home. But what to select out of so great a company of leather jackets and so deserving, and then a crowd of things to be done, and withal a Quaker habit of never doing things till their necessary time, in the hope of doing them better, has postponed my letter from day to day and week to week. But so you must never do, my dear cousin, but for fear you should quite forget your wise adviser, and should be a grown lady, and so I should lose the honor of having had any part in your education, I hasten to send you my poor thoughts upon what is good to be read. I make no pretensions to give you a complete course, but only select a few good books of my acquaintance, such as I think you will like, and such as will serve you. One more preliminary word. Never mind any silly people that try to sneer you out of the love of reading. People are fast outgrowing the old prejudice that a lady ought not to be acquainted with books. It is the best display that disgusts. The knowledge that you get from them never disgusts anybody, but is all useful, and has comforted how many hours that would otherwise have been long, dull, and lonely. First, then, you must keep one or two books for the soul always by you for monitors and angels, lest this world of trifles should run away with you. Such a book is Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ, written by a German monk near 400 years ago, and needs only a little allowance for a Roman Catholic's opinions to make it express the religious sentiment of every good mind. Then there is a little book I value very much, Skougel's Life of God and the Soul of Man. Taylor's Holy Dying is a good book. Its author was called The Shakespeare of Divines. Selections from Fenelon by Mrs. Follen, Ware on the Formation of the Christian Character, Sir Thomas Browne's Religion of a Physician. This is a beautiful work, lately republished in this town. Young's Night Thoughts. A friend whom I value very much told Ellen always to keep Young upon her table. But I suppose you will think here are Sunday books enough. Now for history. The American Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge are publishing Mueller's Universal History in 4 duodecimo volumes. It is very much the best of all the general histories and is very easily read. They have only printed the first volume. The sketch of Rome and of Greece in it are excellent. Then the most important modern history to be read perhaps is Robertson's Charles V, which is an account of Europe in the most interesting period. I would skip the first volume, which is a general view of Europe, and read the two last. Then you might take up Hume, say at the reign of Elizabeth, which would continue pretty well the line of events. The best history of Europe during the French Revolution is Scott's Life of Napoleon. For the American history, as you happen to live at Derry, New Hampshire, I would read Dr. Belknap's History of the State. It is not only a very good book itself, but will give you a pretty good idea of all the states. Their story is so much alike. Morton's New England's Memorial is a little book and a pleasing account of the forefathers. Millman's History of the Jews in the Family Library is a very good book. But what is far more soothing and never painful, like the history of man, is natural history in its various parts. The first volume of the American Library of Useful Knowledge, and you must make the Social Library of Derry subscribe for that book, contains Mrs. Brougham's Discourse upon the Advantages and Prospects of Science, which is excellent, and Mr. Herschel's, which is better. The same Mr. Herschel, son of the famous astronomer, is about to publish a discourse on astronomy, which is expected with great interest. Then there is a beautiful book on American birds, the Ornithology by Mr. Nuttall, that everyone who lives in the country ought to read. I suppose you have read School Conversations on Chemistry. The Conversations on Vegetable Physiology are just as good. With this class of books is the account of polar expeditions, a volume of the Family Library. I suppose to such a formidable list I must add a novel or two, or you would think me very unkind. So I really hope you will read De Vere by the author of Tremaine, and as much of Walter Scott and Miss Edgeworth as you please. For poetry, read Milton. If the Paradise Lost tires you, it is so stately, try the minor poems. Comus, if the mythology does not make it sound strange, is a beautiful poem and makes one holy to read it. Read Bryant's poems. I know you will love them, and Cowper and Thomson, and perhaps, a very large perhaps, Wordsworth. If you do not like poetry, which I suppose you do, the best way to learn is to write some. Now I do not suppose that you will read all these books in a short time, or perhaps at any time, and some of them very probably you have read. I only wanted to fulfill your command and speak a good word for some valued acquaintance of mine. The best of all ways to make one's reading valuable is to write about it, and so I hope my cousin Elizabeth has a blank book where she keeps some record of her thoughts. And if you think my letter very long, why you must bear in mind that I once was a schoolmaster, and I am so proud of my new scholar as to keep her long at my lecture. Make my respectful remembrances to your mother and father, and my compliments to your sister. Your affectionate cousin, R. W. Emerson. February 6th. Every man has some facts in his mind which invalidate the common sayings and incline him to think that the poor are as happy as the rich. The man, not the condition, imports. There are many rich who would be happy if they were poor, many poor who would be unhappy if they were rich. A poem would give me more pleasure than $100, and mine does so far vindicate itself that I think the man does not live so base who would exchange the least intellectual power for the wealth of the world. I believe $100 a year would support me in the enjoyment of what I love best. Why toil I then for 20 times as much? Might I cut and run? Might I dignifiedly walk away and keep the man or turn cat? Take nothing for granted. That strikes you in hearing the course of a wise man, that he has brought to the crucible and the analysis all that other people receive without question, as chemists are directed to select what manufacturers throw away. The words of wise men are heard in quiet more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Ecclesiasticus 9:17. Consider the permanence of the best opinion, the certainty with which a good book acquires fame, though a bad book succeeds better at first. Consider the natural academy which the best heads of the time constitute, in which 'tis pleasant to see act almost as harmoniously and efficiently as if they were organized and acted by vote. Men appreciate instinctively the measure of a superior intellect, as if a part of the man acknowledged the messiahship of wisdom, whilst a part denied it. An awkward consciousness that here is merit, here is power, though latent and wholly inapplicable to my wants and state of mind. I should say it is the Newton within the peasant that recognizes Newton as the ornament of the human race. I met some good sentences in Brewster's Life of Newton from Leonardo da Vinci. I of course take the spiritual sense of the passage. Quote, "In the study of the sciences which depend on mathematics, those who do not consult nature but authors are not the children of nature, they are only her grandchildren. Nature alone is the master of true genius." End quote. Adhere to nature, never to accepted opinion. The sermon which I write inquisitive of truth is good a year after, but that which is written because a sermon must be writ is musty the next day. February 18th, 1832. What can we see, read, acquire but ourselves? Cousin is 1,000 books to 1,000 persons. Take the book, my friend, and read your eyes out. You will never find there what I find. If I would have a monopoly of the delight or the wisdom I get, I am as secure now the book is English as if it were imprisoned in Syriac. Judge of the use different persons can make of this book by the use you are able to make of it at different times, sometimes very imperfectly apprehending the author, and very little interested, again delighting in a sentence or an argument, another time ascending to the comprehension of the whole reasoning, but implicitly following him as a disciple, at another not only understanding his reasoning, but understanding his mind, able not only to discern, but to predict his path and its relation to other paths, to discern his truth and his error. February 19th. Was not all truth always in the world? Even the Lord's Prayer, Grotius represents as a compilation of Jewish petitions, and the German commentators trace almost all the precepts of Christ to the Hebrew Proverbs. And I learned today that the Copernican system, it is gathered from the writings of Aristotle, was maintained by some philosophers before his, Aristotle's, time. Library Useful Knowledge, Life of Galileo. And the new light, brand new of the Swedenborgians even, is old as thought. I match every saying of theirs with some Greek or Latin proverb, such as "the wise man lifting his finger," etc. February 20th, 1832. One is tempted to write a lecture on the right use of the senses, from having attention called to the fact that Galileo lost his sight in 1636. "The noblest eye is darkened," said Castelli, "which nature ever made, an eye so privileged and gifted with such rare qualities, that it may with truth be said to have seen more than all of those who are gone, and to have opened the eyes of all who are to come." See also the expressions of Galileo himself, quoted page 75, Life of Galileo, and Library Useful Knowledge. Galileo died in 1642 at 78. So the eye of Milton. It is idle in us to wonder what the bigotry and violence of the persecution of Galileo. Every man may read the history of it in himself when he is contradicted and silenced in argument by a person whom he had always reckoned his inferior. Emerson mentions unanswered questions. I wrote one day after being puzzled by a mechanical alderman that the first questions remain to be asked. 'Tis even so, and many a profound genius, I suppose, who fills the world with fame of his exploding renowned errors, is yet every day posed by trivial questions at his own supper table. Emerson writes on sin. It is not permitted to do wrong in the dark. Set out to sin, and the whole cause will have a hearing, however brief and mad you be. The best arguments are yet stated by the opposition. The angels are faithful to their post as the devils. Chardon Street, Boston, March 10th, 1832. Temperance is an estate. I am richer, the Stoic might say, by my self-command than I am by my income, and literally, for his acquaintance spends at the confectioner's what pays the bookseller's bill of the Stoic, and makes him rich indeed. Then the sum withholden from the liquor dealer enables the Stoic to be magnificent in expenses of charity and of taste, to say nothing of the doctor's and apothecary's accounts. A good way to look at the matter is to see how it figures in the ledger. Bacon says, best spent in the most permanent ways, such as buying plate. This year I have spent, say, $20 in wine and liqueurs, which are drunk up, and the drinkers are the worse. It would have bought a beautiful print that would have pleased for a century, or have paid a debt. But every indulgence weakened the moral faculty, hurt at least for the time the intellect, lowered the man in the estimation of the spectators, though sharers injured them, and diminished the means of beneficence. March 14th, 1832. Anything not base is desirable to bring about so good an end as this of personal purity. Be master of yourself, and for the love of God keep every inch you gain. No man who has once by hatred or excess mastered his appetites would be brought back to his bondage by any possessions. 28th of March, my food per diem weighed 14 1/4 ounce. 29th, 13. 2nd of April, 12 1/2. Emerson mentions dissatisfaction. What ails you, gentlemen? Said Jupiter. What ails you, my woe-begone friend? Speak, what are you? Bilious. And you? A slave. And you? Hipped. And you? Poor. And you? Lame. And you? A Jew. March 29th. I visited Ellen's tomb and opened the coffin. March 30th. I am your debtor, Sir James Mackintosh, for your ethics, and yet masterly book as it is, highly as I esteem the first account of the conscience that has ever been given, yet is it at last only an outline, nor can suffice to my full satisfaction. Then here is a few Latin words by Horace. I will try to pronounce them. Omnis Aristippum docuit color et status et res. And one quote by Herbert, quote, Be not almighty, let me say, against, but for me, end quote. An ingenious and pleasing account of human nature is Hartley's successive passions as expounded by Mackintosh. Each becomes the parent of a new and higher passion, and itself dies. If the scheme of necessity must be admitted, then let the doctrine also be the antidote, the gradual glorification of man. Very costly scaffoldings are pulled down when the more costly building is finished. And God has his scaffoldings. The Jewish law answered its temporary purpose and was then set aside. Christianity is completing its purpose as an aid to educate man. And evil is a scaffolding on which universal good is reared. God shall be all in all. More to Crabbe of Campbell, quote, True bard, and simple as the race of heaven-born poets ever are, when stooping from their starry place, they are children, near, though gods afar. End quote. The world is an academy to the scholar, a butt to the satirist, a church to the devotee, quote, the scaffold of the divine vengeance, end quote, to the Calvinist, good society to the fashionist, a market to the merchant, a conquest to Alexander. Quote, No one can guess what kind of vision belongs to the fly. There are probably 25,000 hexagonal lenses or menisci on its surface, or the same number of distinct visual organs as some comparative anatomists would lead us to believe. Abernathy Lectures. April 2nd. Write a sermon upon animals. They are to man in life what fables about them are in ethics. Draw the moral then of the bee, ant, fox, hedgehog, ermine, swine, roe, woodpecker, pigeon, worm, moth, mite, a frozen snake. Memoranda for Sermon on Idleness. Quote, in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. Galileo's Eye. He that doth nothing is poorer than he that has nothing. Quote, the devil tempts others, and idle man tempts the devil. An idle brain is the devil's shop. He hath no leisure who useth it not. The busy man is entirely ignorant of what was doing this morning all over the city. Working in your calling is half praying. What keeps the world from being a horrid Penteropolis? What divides and conquers? Necessity of all. Labor. Quote, poverty is a good which all hate. Give us no leisure until we are fit for it. Emerson speaks of the force within. Blundering rhetoricians seeking in the tones or gestures of Chatham or Adams, or in the circumstances of the parties present or concerned, the electricity that lay only in the breast of Chatham and Adams. Pectus est desertum et vis mentis. April 6, 1832. It was comparing the mechanism of the hand and the foot that led Galen, who they say was a skeptic in his youth, to the public declaration of his opinion that intelligence must have operated in ordaining the laws by which living beings are constructed. In explaining these things, he says, I esteem myself as composing a solemn hymn to the great architect of our bodily frame, in which I think there is more true piety than in sacrificing hecatombs of oxen, or burning the most costly perfumes, for I first endeavor from his works to know him myself, and afterwards by the same means to show him to others, to inform them how great is his wisdom, his goodness, his power. Galen, Apud Abernathy Lectures. Hunter like Pestalozzi. Each lived to an idea which was their guide and genius, but Abernathy is hardly a neaterer. So Giswoe wrote nothing, yet had an idea. April 17th. A strange poem is Zoroastrism. It is a system as separate and harmonious and sublime as Swedenborgism, congruent. One would be glad to behold the truth which they all shadow forth, for it cannot be the truth that they typify and symbolize, as the play of every faculty reveals in use a cause and a law to the intelligent. One sees in this and in them all the elements of poetry, according to Jeffrey's true theory, the effect produced by making everything outward only a sign of something inward. Plato's forms or ideas, which seem almost tantamount to the furors of Zoroaster. Quote, of all the furors of being that should exist in the world, the most precious in the eyes of Ormuzd were that of law, that of Iran, and that of Zoroaster. Academy des Inscriptions, Volume 37, page 623. But what I would have quoted just now to illustrate the poetry theory is this. Quote, fire, the son of Ormuzd, was also created. He represented thought imperfectly, the original fire which animates all beings, forms the relations which exist between them, and which in the beginning was a principle of union between Ormuzd and Time Sanzabornis, which is the first name in their Theodicea. By the way, I cannot help but putting in here an exquisite specimen of the verisemblance in fiction. Among the evil persons and things produced by Araman, it is said, and then there are, looks like in French something, which is not translated, page 628. Do we not feel in reading these elemental theories that these grotesque fictions are the gallipots of Socrates, that these primeval allegories are globes and diagrams on which the laws of living nature are explained? Do we not seem nearer to divine truth in these fictions than in less pretending prose? Here is one of the sentences. Gashorun, rejoicing before Ormuzd at the prospect of the creation of Zoroaster, says, I said to heaven in the beginning, when there was no night, that there must be purity of thought, of word, and of action. Page 643. I am quoting from the History de l'Académie des Inscriptions, Volume 37. Prometheus, archaic, quote-unquote, Jupiter and upstart. The foolish took no oil in their vessels with their lamps. Pestalozzi said that no man was either willing or able to help any other man. Chardon Street, April 29th, 1832. You may choose for yourself, or let others choose for you in things indifferent. You may give the law or take it. Let a man set down his foot and say, This or that thing I can't and won't do, and stand it out, and it shall be counted to him not only for innocency, but for righteousness, whilst a poor craven stands by, omitting the same thing and apologizing for it, and receives the hearty contempt and round abuse of all observers. You had better begin small, sail in an eggshell, make a straw your mast, a cobweb all your cloth. Begin and proceed on a settled and not to be shaken conviction that but little is permitted to any man to do or to know, and if he complies with the first grand laws, he shall do well. He had better stick by what he knows certain, that humility and love are always to be practiced, but there is no such pressing reason for his asserting his opinions, but he had better be humble and kind and useful today and tomorrow, and as long as he lasts. Count from yourself in order of the persons that have near relation to you up to 10 or 15, and see if you can consider your whole relation to each without squirming. That will be something. Then have you paid all your debts? Then have you paid to the world as much kindness as you received from early benefactors? If it were a sort of baseness to die in the world's debt, then can you not, merely for the very elegancy, the eruditus luxus of the thing, do an unmixed kindness or two? May 3rd. Sir J. Mackintosh said well that every picture, statue, and poem was an experiment upon the human mind. I hunt in Charles's dish of shells for each new form of beauty and new tint, and seem, as Fontenelle said, to recognize the thing the first time I see it. Every knot of every cockle has expression that is the material symbol of some cast-off thought. Emerson mentions sermons. To analyze a foolish sermon may require much wisdom. Strange that so learned and gifted a man as my friend should please himself with drawing for an hour such gingerbread distinctions. May 7th. Charles says that Puerto Rico is a place where one is never pestered with cold feet, and never needs a pocket handkerchief, and never is unwilling to get out of bed in the morning. Emerson mentions a thought under another name. To be at perfect agreement with a man of most opposite conclusions, you have only to translate your language into his. The same thought which you call God in his nomenclature is called Christ. In the language of William Penn, moral sentiment is called Christ. May 11th. There is no country so extensive as a thought. Quote, He who contemplates hath a day without night. Emerson mentions symbols. I suppose an entire cabinet of shells would be an expression of the whole human mind, a flora of the whole globe would be so likewise, or a history of beasts, or a painting of all the aspects of the clouds. Everything is significant. Emerson writes on Be Master. Reduce the body to the soul. Make the body the instrument through which that thought is uttered. It is counted disgraceful in the ambassador not to represent in dignity of his carriage the power of his country. If your manners are faults to your theory, cut them off, as Cranmer burnt the offending hand. Don't shrink from your work. It will never be an example further than it should be, for no other man has the same freak. Do not believe that possibly you can escape the reward of your action. You serve an ungrateful master. Serve him the more. Be wholly his. Embrace any service. Do what you will, and the master of your master, the law of laws, will secure your compensation. He that rides his hobby gently must always give way to him that rides his hobby hard. Is it not better to intimate our astonishment as we pass through the world, if it be only for a moment ere we are swallowed up in the yest of the abyss? I will just lift my hands and say, and there is a Greek word with an exclamation mark beside it, which is untranslated. May 12th. Burns's remark about fine women too true in my experience. Is not affluence, or at least easy circumstances, essential to the finish of the female character? Not to its depth and resources, perhaps, but to the beauty of mind and manners. Is it not because woman is not yet treated properly, but some taint of Indian barbarity marks yet our civilization? She was made, not to serve, but to be served, and only wealth admits among us of that condition. Or is it that an eye to interest is a fatal blot to the female character, and the poor scarce can help it? Write a sermon upon blessed poverty. Who have done all the good in the world? Poor men. Quote, poverty is as good hated by all men. End quote. Here follows Spanish Proverbs. God comes to us without a bell. A wall between both best preserves friendship. Whither goest thou, grief? Where I am used to go. Make the night night and the day day. Working in your calling is half praying. When you are all agreed upon the time, quoth the curate, I will make it rain. He counts very unskilfully who leaves God out of his reckoning. And there's a footnote that says, Brahma in Emerson's poem says, quote, they reckon ill who leaves me out, end quote. A good man is ever at home wherever he chance to be. Also a footnote that says, quote, go where he will, the wise man is at home, end quote. Poems, Woodnotes. Emerson speaks on truth coming. Truth never is, always is a being. Does not that word signify that state in which a man ever finds himself conscious of knowing nothing, but being just now ready to begin to know? He feels like one just born. He is ready to ask the first questions. Strange how abysmal is our ignorance. Every man who writes a book or pursues a science seems to conceal ambitiously his universal ignorance under his fluency in a particular. The higher the subjects are which occupy your thoughts, the more they tax yourself. And the same thoughts have least to do with your individuality, but have equal interest for all men. Things, moreover, are permanent in proportion to their inwardness in your nature. May 16th, 1832. Shakespeare's creations indicate no sort of anxiety to be understood. There is the Cleopatra, an irregular, unfinished, glorious, sinful character. Sink or swim, there she is, and not one in the 1,000 of his readers apprehends the noble dimensions of the heroine. Then Ariel, Hamlet, and all done in sport with the free, daring pencil of a master of the world. He leaves his children with God. It is a good sign in human nature, the unmixed delight with which we contemplate the genius of Shakespeare, and if it were 10 times more, should be glad. May 17th. King James liked old friends best. As he said, his old shoes were easiest to his feet. We are benefited by coming to an understanding, as it is called, with our fellow men, and with any fellow man. It empties all the ill blood. It ventilates, purifies the whole constitution, and we always feel easiest in the company of a person to whom the whole nature has been so made known, no matter what, but how well known. Emerson speaks on new lights. The moment you present a man with a new idea, he immediately throws its light back upon the mass of his thoughts to see what new relation it will discover. And thus all our knowledge is a perpetually living capital, whose use cannot be exhausted, as it revives with every new fact. There is proof for noblest truths in what we already know, but we have not yet drawn the distinction which shall methodize our experience in a particular combination. May 18th. Shall I not write upon envy? Upon the wisdom of Christ, which ranks envy with robbery, which is only envy in act? Upon the folly of envy, which seeks an impossible thing, vis-a-vis to draw another man's good to itself? In the sweat of thy brow shalt thou eat bread. Upon the nobleness which converts all the happiness of the world into my happiness, and makes Mr. Davis's house agreeable to me? Pestalozzi's melancholy paradox, that no man is able or willing to help any other man, should set men right. Who receive hospitality? The hospitable. Who receive money? The rich. Who receive wisdom? The wise. To whom do opportunities fall? To the opportune. Unto him that hath shall be given. Malthus coops up indomitable millions, spiritual world not so. We rejoice unmixedly in Shakespeare's genius, ardor with which we desire a friend, a teacher of prima philosophia. Admiration warms and exalts. The lover is made happier by his love than the object of his affection. Quote, no revenge is more heroic than that which torments envy by doing good. Would you be revenged? Live well. Who hath envy? I do not envy anyone, in the sense of wishing their goods mine, but I am capable, I may easily see, of malevolence to those who have injured me, or before whom I have played the fool. Charles saith, the Jackson party hath envy, and doubtless the low idle hate the high rich. It is a very low passion, if we have to look so hard to find it. It is as rare as robbery, its bad son. This is the end of part 1 of Emerson's journal collection number 23. In the next video, we will finish that with part 2 and proceed to 24. Thank you for listening.